Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. After a brief one-day respite to focus on bashing the president's Supreme Court nominations, Democrats are back to attacking his executive order on immigration. Take a look.
If he can ban Muslims, he can ban Seventh-day Adventists, he can ban Catholics, he can ban Jews. And I'm telling you right now, we got to stand for each other right here, right now.
Donald Trump, your two-thirds wives are immigrants. Your children's mothers are immigrant. Don't you have any concern about immigration to this country?
Well, President Trump so far has shown no sign of backing down against their wailing and lamentations. Today, the president tweeted this: "Everybody is arguing about whether or not it's a ban. Call it what you want. It's about keeping bad people with bad intentions out of the country." Well, Michelle Brene is the director of migrant rights and the justice program at the Women's Refugee Commission. She's called on people to resist President Trump's executive orders and says that sanctuary cities make this country safer. Michelle Brene joins us now. Michelle, thanks a lot for coming on.
You're very welcome.
Let me just say at the outset that I think that your motivations seem totally pure. I've read a lot about you. I think you're trying to do good work for people in need, and so I respect that. But I'm looking also at the polling on refugee resettlement, and the public cannot be described as supporting it now or in the past. We're strikingly low support for resettling refugees in this country. And if you ask people, do you want them resettled where you live, in your neighborhood, it's even lower. And I'm wondering why that is. Why do you think people don't support it?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that people don't support it, right? I think some polls show that they don't, and I know that support for the programs varies, right? It varies over time, and it varies geographically and among different groups of people.
But I think it's fair to say there's not overwhelming support for it. I mean,
Correct.
I could point to some numbers here, pretty low.
Yes, in some cases they are low, but I think overall, at least the Americans that I engage with, and maybe I try to be diverse in my encounters with people, but I think people do support it. I do think that people are concerned sometimes, right, about how it's going to affect the country. But I think if you look at pockets where there is resettlement,
yes,
there is support. And in fact, many communities that have resettled refugees ask for more refugees. That's actually more common than communities who've experienced having refugees in their community saying we don't want them, right?
I guess what I find interesting, though, in this debate, there's almost no conversation that I have heard about the effect of refugee resettlement on Americans. There's the obvious point that's often made that if you're fleeing some war-riven country or a poor country, of course, it's a massive upgrade to come to America. But what about the Americans? So you tweeted out recently, you said asylum seekers at our border are fleeing violence, which is obviously true. Central America, among the most dangerous regions in the world. That's all completely true. So a lot of Central Americans have been resettled here, Salvadorans, Hondurans, et cetera. We've also seen a cost to that, though. MS-13 didn't exist before large numbers of Central Americans came here. Not attacking all of them, but that's a real thing that's affected Americans. Do you recognize that as a cost?
First of all, I would note that MS-13 didn't exist before the U.S. started imprisoning and returning Central Americans to Central America, right? So we could, and I don't want to get into the root causes of it, but the gangs started in the United States, in Los Angeles, and were actually deported to Central America. So, I don't know that...
I'm not sure I'm following your logic.
Well, the point is just that they didn't necessarily start in Central America. I'm not an expert on that issue. I just wanted to point out that they didn't start there. But to your point, let me just get to your point.
But there's still refugees who are here, and their presence has created a massive crime problem called MS-13. That's a cost, isn't it?
Well, again, first of all, I think we need to distinguish between refugees and people who come here in other ways, right? I just want to make sure that the audience understands that we have a formal refugee resettlement program.
Not all immigrants are refugees,
which
of course.
Is what has been... which is what one of the executive orders addresses directly, is refugees, right? Right. Central Americans coming, for the most part, are not refugees. There is a small refugee program now that just started and is likely to not continue. It's on halt now, right? But they come in as asylum seekers, which is different. But it's a technical thing. We don't need to worry about it. But yes.
But there's no doubt that refugees from Central America have wound up in criminal gangs.
Of course. There's criminals in all communities, right? I would argue, though, to your point of what immigrants and refugees have done for this country and the effect on it, I think overwhelmingly it's a positive effect, not a negative effect.
Okay, but don't you think that you weaken your case by downplaying or refusing to acknowledge the downside of it?
There's always downsides. I'm going to acknowledge
but when
that
you say, I guess here's how I'm...
You want a vet who's coming in, right? And you want to treat them like anybody else. If they commit crimes, they should be
But
held
will you
accountable for those
acknowledge something
crimes.
that I think common sense confirms, and I also think social science proves it, that when people are coming from war-torn places, have grown up around conflict and violence, obviously you want to rescue them from that, but it also increases the likelihood that they'll be involved in conflict and violence.
I don't think there's any evidence
Well,
of
I think
that,
there's
Tucker.
quite a bit of that.
Well, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen that evidence.
People who grow up in places, and I'm not attacking them at all, I'm just saying it makes a kind of sense, and I think MS-13, and there are many other examples of this, certainly throughout the world where refugees have been resettled, that's a potential cost. Would you acknowledge that?
What I would say is that what we know and is fact is that communities with higher immigrant populations, including the populations you're talking about, actually have lower crime rates than communities that
So
don't.
you're saying if we were to
So there's a lower
import
crime rate among the immigrant population in the United States than there is among the non-immigrant.
the native-born population, but doesn't it also make sense, and hard to kind of deny this, that if you import people from peaceful, the people bring part of their culture with them.
Sure.
And if you bring people from very violent countries, they're more likely to commit violence
Not if
when
they're
they get
fleeing
here.
that violence, right? If somebody is actually
But do you have evidence to
resisting the
show that? I
violence-
don't think that that's true, actually.
Well,
So
have
if
you ever met any of the people we're talking about? Because
Sure, and I'm not attacking them. I'm just saying we're talking about large numbers of people, so we're
Right.
speaking in the aggregate, and I have a
Exactly.
lot of sympathy for people who want to get out of El Salvador, for sure, or Syria
Right.
for that matter. But I also think it's worth worrying about Americans to whom we owe an allegiance as fellow Americans, and to whom our government owes its only allegiance.
Sure.
And so, like, to say there's no cost, they're all great, that's a lie, and everyone
I'm
knows
not
that.
saying that. I've never
Okay.
said that all immigrants are great, right? I mean, I think immigrants should be treated like any other citizen in our community.
Why would they be treated
or
like
individual?
but they're
who,
not
who, if they
citizens.
commit a well, all right, individual. I mean citizen as a person. So that was a mistake on my part, but. They should be treated like anybody else in our country. If they commit crimes, they should be charged with those crimes,
But
right?
why would you want to import anybody? I mean, we're doing this voluntarily, okay? We're
Because
doing
the
a good
immigrant
deed.
population we're importing,
But
as
why
you
would
say,
you want
are not
any
criminals.
Okay, but some of them actually are, and you know that to be true. I'm not saying most are. I think most are good people, and they want to be here for the right reasons, and I get it. But if you're importing people at your expense, and the U.S. government pays for this, as
Well,
you
we're
know.
not paying for asylum seekers to come to the United
We're
States.
paying for the cost of bearing them once they arrive, as you know.
They don't
and that
really.
cost is
No, I'm not. They
well,
don't. They're not eligible for any benefit.
Well, they go to public schools, and let me ask you about that. So we have resettled immigrants all over the country, but disproportionately to poor communities for a bunch of different reasons I know you're familiar with. Buffalo is one of them.
Right.
There's a piece today in the New York Post by Betsy McCoy. It's really interesting. Last decade, 10,000 refugees go to Buffalo. A lot of them wind up at Lafayette High School. 45 languages spoken there. 70% of the students are just learning English.
Right.
Now, this is one of the worst schools in the state of New York. 14% of people graduate on time. This is a massive burden for the school. It doesn't help the people who are already there.
Right.
The obvious question is, why aren't we resettling them in places where people support refugee resettlement, like Chevy Chase, Maryland, or Beverly Hills, California, because people don't want to bear the cost of the policies they support?
Refugees are resettled in communities that do voluntarily accept them. The government does not force refugees
I'm
in
aware.
communities. So, in general, as I said earlier, communities that receive refugees generally are asking for them, are benefiting from them, and are very happy to have them there.
So if you had a
Utica,
child,
for example,
oh,
right?
come on, if you had a child at a school that all of a sudden became half immigrant, non-English speaking, I don't care if every one of those kids is smart and disciplined and hardworking, that's a massive cost.
You know what? I'm really glad you said that, Tucker, because my kids do go to a school like that.
What percentage
And they-
non-English speaking is that?
I don't know, but there are a lot. They have several kids in their
Well, then
class.
you know it's
and in
a
fact,
high cost to the school. It is, and why
it
not
is in the
acknowledge
community,
that?
And the community, well, it is a cost to the school, but
Right.
but the community that I'm in and that my children go to school in is welcoming of those kids. They're happy to have it. Parents volunteer and work with them. The kids learn a lot from having this diverse cultures in their classes. And overall, I would say that it's a positive thing. I'm not denying it's a cost.
Both of us live in one of the most affluent areas in the country. Here's my point, and this is, I guess, what bothers me. There's an unfairness for affluent people like us to turn to the rest of the country and say, you're bigots for not supporting the resettlement of people who don't speak our language, don't share our culture, and whose costs we will pay for. You're a bad person if you're not for that.
I
And
don't
that's
think
an
I've ever
unfair.
called anybody a bigot.
But isn't the position on Trump's executive orders that anyone who's for this is motivated by bigotry or dislike of the other? And that's not a fair thing to say.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that receiving refugees and welcoming refugees in what I believe is an American tradition is something that I'm very proud of as an American.
Right.
It's something that I don't like to see turned its back on. And that's my point, really.
Let me ask you one last question then, and it's about assimilation. So some of these are people who already share our values and are familiar with our country, but many of them are not. And they're coming from places whose values are not just different from ours, but opposed to ours. They don't believe in an open liberal society. And I've got a lot of data to back it up, okay? What are we doing when we import someone from a country where 98% of the women have experienced genital mutilation, for example, and people don't believe that men and women are equal, they hate gays? What are we doing to bring them in to our culture and to convince them that our values are the right values? I don't see that we're doing much.
Actually, I think we are. I think that's one of the great things about America. I think that you will see that it takes one generation or less for people to really become assimilated. And in fact, studies are showing that recent immigrants are actually assimilating much quicker than they did in the past.
So what percentage?
They learn English, they have American friends, they adopt American, social norms and cultural experiences.
So what percentage of immigrant families from, say, Somalia, where there's a 98% occurrence of female genital mutilation, practice that on their daughters in the United States?
I have no idea.
Do you think it would be interesting to know?
Sure, and maybe there's a study out there that says it, but I don't know what it is, right? But my experience has been that when I speak to Somali young women who have immigrated to this country or whose parents have immigrated to this country, they are very American to me.
But do you tell them that that's wrong?
Well, I haven't had that conversation with very many of them, but many
why not?
I have had that conversation with some of them. Look, we worked on. I was at the Board of Immigration Appeals at the Department of Justice at the time when the famous FGM case came up.
I remember.
And a lot of people were arguing that FGM is not a practice that is acceptable, especially by force, right?
Well, it's illegal, among other things, but it still continues, and I just wish we would take a stand for our own values.
I don't know what the rates are in the U.S. I don't have any problem with that.
All right. Thanks a lot for joining us, Michelle.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Well, President Trump's national security advisor put Iran on notice today while the president and his daughter, Ivanka, made a surprise trip to Dover Air Force Base. And a short time ago, we heard from President Trump at his Secretary of State's swearing-in ceremony. A lot's been going on. Fox News correspondent Trace Gallagher is following all of it, and he has an update. Trace?
Hi, Tucker. Former ExxonMobil chairman and chief executive Rex Tillerson was confirmed by the Senate today to become the nation's 69th Secretary of State. The final vote was 56-43. The 43 no votes were the most in Senate history. At the swearing-in ceremony a short time ago, here's how President Trump addressed Secretary Tillerson.
Though you inherit enormous challenges in the Middle East and around the world, I do believe we can achieve peace and stability in these very, very troubled times.
The president also talked about his unannounced trip to Dover Air Base to honor the returning remains of a U.S. Navy SEAL killed during a weekend raid on an al-Qaeda compound in Yemen. 36-year-old Chief Special Warfare Operator William Ryan Owens was the first U.S. combat casualty since Trump took office 12 days ago. Here's the president.
I just returned from an amazing visit with a great, great family at Dover, and it was something very sad, very beautiful.
Owens' family requested the president's visit and the transfer of remains be kept private. Meantime, National Security Advisor Mike Flynn made it crystal clear today that unlike the Obama administration, the Trump administration will not put up with Iran's behavior. Flynn is referring to two separate incidents: Iran's testing of a ballistic missile and Iranian-backed rebels attacking a Saudi naval vessel. U.S. defense officials tell Fox News the attack on the Saudi ship may have been meant for an American warship. Today, the National Security Advisor also made an apparent reference to the Obama administration's Iran nuclear deal. Listen.
Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
And the president is now advising Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to go nuclear if need be. Trump says if Democrats try to hold up the nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, Senate Republicans should change the rules, allowing Gorsuch to be confirmed with a simple majority, 51 votes instead of 60. And some Democrats are also urging their colleagues to give Gorsuch a chance. Tucker.
The great Trace Gallagher. Thanks a lot, Trace. Well, after the break, we'll be joined by a Colorado state representative who's written a bill that would let victims of crimes by illegal immigrants sue the politicians who created the sanctuary cities in which they live. And then, even some Democrats seem content with President Trump's nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. We'll talk to a Democratic strategist, however, who says Gorsuch is an unacceptable extremist who ought to be stopped by any means necessary. Stay tuned.
We've done well in life. With help from our advisor, we made it through many market swings. Sure, we could travel, take it easy, but we've never been the type to just sit back. Not when we've got so much more to give. When you have the right financial